All right. Good afternoon, 12:03. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Um, while we're getting started, if you'd like to put your name, your town, and your board or committee affiliation in the chat, I'd love to know who's with us today. As always, we've got some familiar faces and some new faces in the crowd, so thank you for being here. My name is Amanda Bebrin. I'm the Director of Housing Advocacy at the Community Development Partnership, or CDP. The CDP is a nonprofit community development corporation, and we lead the Lower and Outer Cape in building a diverse year-round community of people who can afford to live, work, and thrive here. We do that through small business technical assistance, property management of affordable units, first-time homebuyer classes, and housing advocacy. And we do all of that through collaboration with our municipal, business, and community partners. Today's workshop on community land trusts is the fourth of 5 workshops in the 2024-2025 Lower Cape Housing Institute curriculum, or the LCHI. The LCHI is a program that provides education, resources, and support to the municipal officials and staff of the 8 Lower and Outer Cape towns. We hold a series of workshops on advanced housing topics, including this one. We also host quarterly peer groups. Those are a less formal space for town officials and housing advocates to connect, share ideas and updates, and build relationships across town lines. Spring peer group is coming up in March and registration is open. I'll send out that link in the follow-up email. My team also offers technical assistance and individual support as needed. I like to say that if you have a local government or affordable housing question, I'll either know the answer, find it, or be able to tell you who to ask. Lastly, I want to note that the Housing Institute is very generously supported by all 8 towns' community preservation committees and town meeting voters, and we are always really grateful for that support and being able to provide the programming and resources that we do. Since CPC funds do support this program, please encourage your fellow board and committee members to attend and really get the most out of that investment in this program. So as we get into our agenda, I want to say again that we do record these workshops, and I'll send out the link and any materials in a follow-up email. We should have some time at the end of our session for some Q&A today, and feel free to put questions in the chat as the speakers present. We've got somebody watching the chat. And with that, I will turn it over to Shelley Gehring, who is a senior project manager at MHP, and she's going to give us some context to consider as we move through the session today. So Shelley, over to you.
Thanks, Amanda. And hi, everyone. It's great to be here. And I wanted to offer some support for your learning today from MHP, Mass Housing Partnership. We're always impressed with the work that's happening out on the Lower Cape. We all know that our housing crisis is complex and it impacts more and more people directly. The longer that it goes on, it impacts all of us indirectly. And complex problems require complex solutions. And in the housing world, we often talk about a toolbox, and different tools are needed on all levels, at the state level, regional, and local level. And community land trusts can be one tool in the toolbox that certainly many communities, many regions are using. Different models can help serve different constituents and tackle different pieces of the puzzle. And land trusts in particular can help stabilize land costs for the land that's held in trust. But the idea of each community having their own land trust is really a tall order. But could there be a regional land trust on the Cape, particularly the Lower Cape or the Outer Cape? What are your shared values and your shared concerns across towns? Some urban land trusts tend to focus on combating displacement with that's oftentimes their strategy or the impetus to create a land trust, as in Boston. We have actually three land trusts now in Boston that displacement is a big part of the concern. In Amherst, in Western Mass, their land trust is really seeking to strengthen year-round neighborhoods. And that made me think of the Cape and some of your concerns around year-round, supporting your communities to be year-round communities. So as you're learning today, perhaps you can just be considering whether this is a tool that makes sense for the Lower or the Outer Cape. There seems to be renewed interest in land trusts in Massachusetts. In the last 10 years, there are 2 new ones in Boston, 1 new one in Chelsea, 1 in Amherst. There's one developing in Somerville. So it seems to be something, and I hear more communities talk about it. So it seems to be something that communities are thinking about as a tool. It's typically private outside of the municipality, but working really closely with the municipality. is this an entity that your town may want to work with? Does it make sense for your community as well as the region? So I'm excited that you're learning about this, and I'm going to listen in for a little bit, but I'm going to pass it back to Amanda.
Thank you so much for that, Shelley. It's always great to have a little bit of the larger picture for all of the things that we talk through. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chloe Schaefer, Chief Planner at the Cape Cod Commission, who has been doing a lot of research into community land trusts and land banks, and sort of what that means for the Cape. So, Chloe, I will turn it over to you. Oh yeah, it's going to be a great screen share. Come on, there we go. All right, we've got slides. All systems
Great.
to go. This has not been a good week for Zoom. All right, Chloe, take it away. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. And Amanda, thank you so much for having us. And it's great to see all of you here. Again, my name is Chloe Schaefer, Chief Planner at the Commission. And as Amanda mentioned, we have been looking into land trusts as well as land banks as part of our regional housing strategy recommendations. So we completed our regional strategy in, I believe, May or June of 2024, so just last year. And its purpose really is to help address our housing supply, affordability, and availability challenges while also protecting our sensitive resources. It's grounded in 8 guiding principles, which really were critical in its formation, as well as now moving forward in its implementation. I'm not going to go through all of these, but just to touch on a couple things like generating a greater variety of housing, supporting our year-round population. We know seasonal workers are critical in our region, but we also know that our year-round population faces very acute challenges. And as we're addressing our housing challenges, making sure that we're also addressing other critical regional issues, such as protecting our natural and cultural resources, addressing climate change and coastal resiliency, preparing us for current and future impacts there. And as we look to develop and redevelop housing, redevelopment really will play a critical role in our region. So that's another key one here, prioritizing redevelopment and really looking at how we could reuse and preserve our existing housing stock as we move forward. And just a few of the key findings, I'm sure none of this is surprising to any of you, but that really grounded our recommendations of the regional housing strategy. One is that the vast majority, 80% of our homes in the region are detached single-family homes, so there aren't a lot of opportunities for other more compact or naturally occurring affordable housing in the region. So how can we provide greater diversity in the options available? Sales prices have woefully outpaced incomes in terms of increases over the last several years. There's a lot of pressure in terms of short-term rentals, certainly in the market, with incomes from those greatly outpacing average year-round rental income. And it's very expensive. A household must earn over $200,000 annually to affordably purchase a median price single-family home, which is more than double the actual median household income. Certainly our demand is outpacing our supply, and also in terms of looking at building new housing, certainly only about 2% of our land is zoned to allow housing developments of more than 2 units to be built by right. So those are kind of some of the key challenges as we looked forward in providing recommendations for the regional housing strategy. And there are 13 regional recommendations. These include things like changing zoning, streamlining permitting, as well as other types of tools or mechanisms, such as financial incentives for preserving year-round housing, supporting ADUs, and other things that are critical, such as developing a regional capital plan. We know our infrastructure is also really important as we look to address our housing challenges. And so I will be diving into that third recommendation there, developing a community land trust and regional housing land bank, but really diving into the community land trust portion of that today and glancing over the land bank part for now, given today's topic. But to put it briefly, a housing land bank would be an organization, typically a quasi-public organization, that would buy and sell land. It's not looking to hold land in perpetuity or for a long period of time, but being an entity that's available should a property come on the market or someone's looking to sell a property, they can act swiftly to acquire it, prepare it then for either preserving existing housing, redeveloping, kind of whatever would make the most sense, and then passing it off to the next entity that would then take it from there. To complement that would be a community land trust, looking at a private nonprofit organization. In this context, they would be looking to hold the land in perpetuity. We are talking today about one focused on affordable and attainable housing, but these certainly exist for other purposes as well and on the Cape already, especially for land conservation. So not a totally new concept there, but just wanted to point out kind of the two differences between these entities as we're talking about them, with the land trust then holding that land and looking to develop or preserve the housing on it. So we can develop the regional housing strategy throughout 2023, completing it in 2024. And based on stakeholder input of that process, that's where this recommendation of developing a community land trust and housing land bank came from. We heard from many people, particularly from municipalities, that oftentimes they can't take advantage of opportunities as they arise because of the more deliberate procurement processes that they have to go through. So there was this identified gap for regional entities that could really act more swiftly, quickly, in terms of taking advantage of those opportunities as they present themselves and preserving or providing greater affordable and attainable housing in the region. So in 2024, we worked with consultants researching an implementation plan for those two entities, how they might be established in the region, understanding from stakeholders through several meetings, kind of what they would like to see as key values, mission driving those organizations should they become developed. Though I will say this is all still very fluid and open to input from the community. And we are just finalizing that report with its recommendations, should likely have that out in the next couple of weeks. And as we look to 2025, and certainly even much more beyond 2025, hoping there will be more engagement and actual implementation of those recommendations, the commission would be taking a lighter touch from there, certainly providing resources and being a collaborator, but really ultimately either of these entities would need to be driven by the community with great leadership and initiative by our residents and those who would really kind of spearhead these efforts moving forward. So we're providing this framework and certainly still will be a resource, but these are really meant to be community-driven initiatives. So very briefly, the classic community land trust model is typically an independent nonprofit. There are other certainly models or iterations, but what we're generally talking about here would be an independent nonprofit. They often sell the buildings but lease the land, so they retain the land through a ground lease, and they would retain that permanently, thus really removing the land cost from the equation of housing, bringing the cost down, making it more affordable, also potentially having then further restrictions on the housing units there, especially what they could be resold at to really maintain them as affordable in perpetuity. They are a membership organization, which can be combined of members both throughout the general area they serve, then usually also a significant number of people on their board are residents within their communities. And then really key to it is this idea of economic democracy, making sure there's equity and really ensuring that their needs are meeting the needs of their residents and those that are most in need moving forward. And as I kind of touched on already, but we'll mention again here, there's usually an open membership for anyone within the area that they serve. They can become a member, and they then elect a board of directors, which in the most traditional model is usually a tripartite board of residents of their projects, area directors, more from the broader region, as well as some technical expert or public directors as well. Just briefly, CLTs really emerged from the South with Black farmers really setting up resident managed communities there. And that has then spread to the Northeast, really for, again, a range of purposes. As Shelley mentioned, sometimes it's really focused more on displacement or year-round housing, but really certainly with affordable housing being kind of a broader umbrella and purpose of many of them. And there are numerous land trusts throughout the country. The yellow ones are in Canada as well. So certainly this is not a new idea. People are doing this already, but certainly something I think that is gaining more momentum in our region and elsewhere as people are confronting the severe housing challenges we're facing. And just a couple of more local examples, Island Housing Trust on Martha's Vineyard has been around for almost 20 years. They have created more than 150 affordable homes and have another 150 in the pipeline. And it's been a mix of types of homes and neighborhoods, and they really utilize a range of funding sources. And they are a private nonprofit. They did start as the typical tripartite board, but have evolved from there. And they also, interesting, I think of note here is they also now have mission-driven investment opportunities that provides funding for their projects. And then just a slightly newer one in Somerville, they've just established one within the last 5 years or so, I would say. And that really came out of a city-led process to explore its establishment. It was then launched as an independent nonprofit, but that framework provided by the municipality, they have now acquired a couple properties, one of which was going to be sold, and are continuing to evolve their board from their interim to a more stable form of government. So we've been working over the past 7 or 8 months with a team of consultants to look into researching existing CLTs and land banks, and then developing a process for how those might be established in the Cape, on the Cape, with input from stakeholders and making sure that they really address the needs of our community. It's been a team led by Outwith Studio, who has done a lot of housing ecosystem research. They also assisted us in development of the regional housing strategy, so they were very familiar with that work. UTIL is an architecture and planning firm that helped to identify some of the real estate and spatial strategy aspects of this. Ephemera has helped with nonprofit organizational design, and then we have had involvement from land bank specialist Bricker Graydon. They're out of Ohio, where there are numerous land banks there. And so in terms of the recommendations, first for the Community Land Trust, talking about the mission and values, again, based on the input we've received thus far in the process. So certainly these are recommendations and up for further input and engagement. But the mission of the CLT would really be to acquire and hold land in the region for permanently affordable and attainable housing opportunities for our community. And its operations would be really guided by these 6 values here: community power, making sure that the community is involved in decision-making, in guiding the operations of the organization, and really prioritizing the needs of our residents and giving them power in how this organization moves forward. Certainly affordability, again, getting back to that permanently affordable and attainable housing, providing those solutions for a range of families and incomes. Sustainability, this is something we heard a lot about throughout the process and was referenced in our guiding principles for the regional housing strategy, but making sure that as we're addressing our housing challenges, and as a CLT might be looking at different properties available, that they're also making sure we're doing so in an environmentally responsible way, making sure that we're addressing those challenges facing our region as well and not exacerbating them. And then equity, certainly making sure that the organization serves people from all backgrounds, promotes fair and equitable access to housing opportunities. Transparency, making sure that The organization operates in an open and clear manner. And then action here, really prioritizing incremental progress, taking steps where it's possible, and not kind of letting the perfect be the enemy of the good, if you will, here, making sure that steps are taken along the way and not getting too bogged down in an idealized grand project, if you will. And in terms of the types of kind of programmatic aspects of the organization, really be two-pronged, looking to preserve existing housing for year-round residents of various incomes. So housing that does exist that might be for sale, or perhaps affordability restrictions are expiring, that type of a thing, identifying those opportunities, purchasing those properties and preserving them as they are. And then the flip side of that is looking to develop or redevelop certain areas, particularly infill opportunities where the infrastructure exists. And again, ensuring that new development, it'd be focused more on redevelopment and not impacting our sensitive environmental areas and other resources. So both looking to preserve as well as develop, but in those appropriate areas. And it would be looking both at affordable, being that capital A affordable, deed restricted homes up to 80% of AMI, but also providing support for attainable housing, providing support for our residents that make more than 80% AMI, but certainly still cannot affordably secure a home in our current market and need some assistance there. So both affordable and what we're calling attainable housing. And this flow chart is just to kind of help you, give you an idea of its strategy, how it might function in terms of making decisions about different properties. So ideally, they would be receiving land either from a land bank, another nonprofit partner, from a municipality potentially. And then if that already has existing housing on it, understanding kind of the aspects of that. Is it ready? Does it need to be rehabbed? And next steps there, if they need to partner with a development nonprofit, or if it's kind of ready to go. And then ultimately, likely ground leasing the land and then selling or renting the building to income eligible residents. And as it looks at properties and opportunities throughout the region, the recommendations from our consulting team, they've come up with some kind of key considerations. One is looking at the development suitability of it, recognizing, does it have critical habitat? Is it an environmentally sensitive land or not? And if it is environmentally sensitive, then maybe it doesn't make sense for the community land trust. Looking at the infrastructure, certainly infrastructure generally, but of particular need in our region is the water and wastewater infrastructure, ensuring that that's viable or could be constructed or dealt with effectively. And then also prioritizing areas that already have activity. They already have economic activity, community amenities, as well as other transit opportunities, so people can bike and walk and take public transportation and are not necessarily reliant on their own car. So those were some development suitability considerations. And then also really looking at what might be the propensity for change of the parcel if it needs to. Is it, for example, an underutilized commercial property? Does it have a low building value? Kind of, so maybe it's more ripe for redevelopment. Also looking at the zoning, of course, if changes need to be made, what would the zoning allow? Looking at other things where towns have done planning for housing production plans, is it perhaps an identified parcel there that would bode well for it, hopefully, and other aspects for consideration. Generally, for the community land trust, as we're talking about it here, the recommendation would be focusing on a scale of around 2 to 20 units, so smaller scale, recognizing that larger opportunities, 60 plus units, those might be better suited for a nonprofit housing developer that might be utilizing low-income housing tax credits or the like. But these smaller scale projects can be more challenging and not something we see supported as much throughout the region, so the land trust could help with that. In terms of funding, it's an independent nonprofit. It wouldn't necessarily have a dedicated public revenue source. So it'd be looking at grants, philanthropic donations, especially in the initial years, starting small, relatively small startup grant, hopefully. Whoops, that middle box should say years 2 to 5, but then moving into potentially some more public resources, though still smaller there, expanding grant capacity, looking into actual crowdfunding, and then beyond that, really stabilizing some of the funding sources and perhaps looking to other innovative tools like impact investing. And in terms of its governance, it's recommended it starts with an initial board of just 3 to 5 directors who would have some expertise in the financial aspects of affordable housing, as well as legal, and someone who also understands external relations communications to help really spread the word about the land trust, garner more support and engagement throughout the community. And after reaching certain milestones, whether that's a number of projects, housing units, that type of a thing, would then look to transition to a stable governance board, which would be much larger, 15 directors, 5 of them being residents of community land trust properties with not more than 1 per household. 5 being general directors. These would be from the community, with 3 at large, and then ensuring 1 represents the interests of the Portuguese speaking community and another 1 representing interests of our communities of color. And then 5 public directors, 1 from each sub-region, as well as 1 representing the interests of the Wampanoag tribe. And then certainly some potentially non-voting ex officio members from the state, other nonprofits in the region, as well as ourselves. And there are numerous next steps laid out in the plan. I think there's 11 or 12, but just kind of the first few, what we're looking at is really facilitating convening a committee that would incorporate this organization. They would then be looking to incorporate it, adopting their bylaws and a strategic plan, and then working on their tax exempt status before really being able to move on to business planning, acquiring parcels of land, and ultimately hiring staff and launching initial project. So that's what I have for you today. And I think I'll pass it back to Amanda.
Thank you so much, Chloe. That was a super helpful sort of nuts and bolts overview of what a CLT is and how it could operate. There is so much potential to consider here. And so I think our obvious next step is to hear from Brenda Torpy, who is lead consultant at Champlain Housing Trust in Vermont. And she's going to talk us through what their actual community land trust looks like, how it runs, and what they've been accomplishing over these last few years. I'm gonna spotlight Brenda. And Brenda, if you want to go ahead and share your screen, the floor is yours. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Amanda, and thank you. It's great to see you all. And that was indeed a tremendous, good planning to help your community. Like I could just walk in and take the steps. That's a lot of the work that I do with groups around the country now. And before I started doing this, I was the leader of Champlain Housing Trust for about 30 years and was one of the founders. So a lot of growth, a lot of change over the years, but this is about Champlain Housing Trust today. And I'll just launch right in. Can you see this all right?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Oh. So Champlain Housing Trust, this is our mission statement, that we're a community land trust who support the people of Northwest Vermont through the development and stewardship of permanently affordable housing. We are a classic community land trust. We have membership that is very active. In fact, our annual meeting's tomorrow night. We expect 350 people to come, and we elect the board and all of that. So we have stuck that. It's been a great model for us to build, community support and spread the word. So here's us in a bit of a snapshot. And you can see the 3 counties right in the northwest on the coastal Lake Champlain and right up to the border. And the furthest to the left are the islands of Lake Champlain. So today we started in Burlington and we had anti-gentrification, just a thumbnail of how we got here, particularly for low-income neighborhoods around the downtown, and then quickly expanded to be county-wide for the wider housing market. And our core mission was protect tenants from gentrification and create this permanently affordable home ownership. And we've been doing that ever since. And then we grew to the 3 counties, and some of our growth was by merger. And I just wanted to underline the great advice you just got about today. Nonprofits are starting regionally. While there's a lot of benefit to localism, we've learned in Vermont that you need the heft of a regional. So it gives you more market to work in and brings people together on it. So we have today about 2,700 plus apartments, and we have 700 plus shared equity homes in it. So homeownership is that part of our operations. We have 30 commercial spaces, primarily nonprofit services and neighborhood services, but also some ground floor retail, downtowns, because it's what you need for the housing. And then we have 3 more of these community spaces underway. We have 5 different loan programs. I'll just briefly explain those. A couple of them we do statewide for the other trusts around the state. There's 5 land trusts. And then, so our assets are now, over 300 million, and our operating budget's quite big because since COVID, we have added a big social service department because we have that need to retain our renters and assist them, and we just needed to have that in-house now. So this sums up kind of the way we operationalize that mission as a land trust. We serve people from homelessness to home ownership. You'll see some samples, but homelessness we leaned into after the financial crash when shelter providers were overwhelmed, and that brought us into that. Our rental housing, we have a real emphasis in our rentals on renter retention. So we do financial counseling, education, and we have all kinds of supports, the social work, to not do economic displacement. We will manage if there's misbehavior, of course, and then home ownership is the key. And the thing about our shared equity program is we have a full service home ownership center where we do general home buyer education, certified, counseling. And so some people can come, that's not means tested. And people can come and someone can go to the bank and buy a home. And so our program then provides an option for people to get mortgage ready, but can't leap into our hot market. So a little bit about the context we're working in. Very strong job growth, very difficult to retain and attract employees because of the housing situation. We always have a very high housing wage gap. But now with, work from home opportunities, we're gentrifying again in home ownership because people come from much more expensive markets and buy a home here without a mortgage and work from here. So we have a challenge. These things that are vital in our economy do affect the housing market. And then again, rents increased here after the financial crash over the next few years by 40%. And since COVID, our housing purchase costs are up almost double in the core parts of our market. So very low vacancies. We're all dealing with higher interest rates. These things combine to make it difficult for people to be homeowners here. And we do have the short-term rental, and Burlington has put some restrictions in, and I highly recommend, we wish the rest of our region would, because it just takes your housing out of the market and raises competition for rent. So just a little bit of what's upcoming. This is in downtown Burlington, and it is a combination of housing on top and community center on the ground floor for veterans, and the housing will serve a range of low-income renters. And this is a site that we first purchased, an old motel to serve the homeless as emergency shelter, and it's under construction now. I go there, it's really going up fast in spite of the cold. So we will have over 30 condos there plus rentals. So when we can do these projects at scale, you know, it is effective. And then this one's I wanted to put in because Burlington has inclusionary zoning, and you talked about the potential of policies to support this from your communities. And on the waterfront is 25% permanently affordable for new development. So this is a partnership with a private developer who was redeveloping this property. And it's not all built out. This is an image looking forward, but all of the streetscapes built out. And we have 76 affordable apartments, and we're doing our first phase of affordable condos down in the left point by the water. We'll have, this first tranche will have about 30 affordable condos. So in all, there'll be 900 homes here, and this is, you mentioned the smart growth goals that you have of building your housing. It's on public transportation, it's near the downtown, but we added a public beach and community space, gardens. So it'll be a good neighborhood. This gives you just an image. Some of our service housing is not just shelters, but things that work as transitional housing, that we don't have a cliff for people. So we bought some hotels that were easily repurposed into small rentals, and that was much more affordable than doing the traditional and low-income housing tax credit construction. Some are like for folks fleeing domestic violence, some are just general stepping stone. So it's an apartment, but we have services on site. Now about 25% of our larger rental portfolio is people who've been formerly homeless. So we really do lean into that, serve very low income people. And then we were asked to do pods by our city. This is right in the core of the city. They worked very well for the folks who are very chronically homeless individuals. And then our neighborhood work this is in the Old North End, the one on the left. It was a school that was being, emptied out. And it's indicative of what we've done there. It's a 0.8 square mile neighborhood, but we have 400 homes of all kinds in there. And we've done a lot of this kind of community property for the removal of blight, for adaptive reuse. So this was a school, and now it serves multiple nonprofits who actually really work together. And our city parks department has indoor sports programming there because it has a big old classic gym. And on the right is a community center that was failing in Winooski, which is right across the river from Burlington. And so we're redeveloping that for them. And it's very broad, it has a health center in it. So very important, very low-income neighborhood, very high refugee resettlement area. So I won't dwell on our loan programs, but our home repair programs are really all real health and safety for very low-income owners, very important in our rural portfolio, folks with furnaces, building envelope, weatherization, accessibility. So these are almost operate as grants for people. This manufactured down payment program has an interest in that. It's funded by a state tax credit, which you could use for home ownership if the state wanted to do it. But anyway, and we help people very affordably buy better rated, energy efficient mobile homes. And again, the loans are structured as they don't have to be repaid. We don't put restrictions on the manufactured housing because they don't appreciate that much. So we just, support that. The improvement program is, our governor loves this program to give grants to landlords to bring properties that have been, don't meet code and are offline back. He doesn't put much restriction on it, but we do facilitate those to people. And then we have a farm worker housing program where we help farmers improve their farm worker housing. There's been a really big take up of this program is terrific and create better conditions for the workers. And then our shared equity program, I wanted to mention here that we've added a supplemental down payment assistance to people of color. And that's enabled us to have like 40% of our recent sales to people of color. And so that's been valuable, and that's funded by mostly about large credit unions and some other big philanthropic sources. So now a few minutes just on that home ownership, which you guys are interested in. We use ground leasing for single family homes, but of course we use a covenant deed restriction on things like condos where, you know, the condo has to own the land, but they have the same terms in them and we operate them the same way. And our formula is appraisal based, but people earn, you know, shared equity is kind of a misnomer because people don't share their equity. They share the increase of value. So our homeowners get 100% of their principal pay down or anything they brought to the deal. They get 100% of the current appraised value of any capital improvement. So we have a process for that so people can recoup that, but only 25% the profit. And this has helped to keep our homes affordable to the same band over, oh, it's 40 years now. We haven't had to change it, but you could change your formula to adapt to conditions. This just gives you a sense of the variety of the portfolio because of the different markets we're in. Down on the left, very inner, close suburb, 60 condos, 30 of them resale restricted. Up on the top left, that's manufactured housing, or what do you call that? Anyway, you just put it together. And that's in a very expensive suburb of Burlington. We have a little neighborhood, about 8 of those. And then on the far right, the kind of tiny single family home that you find in our target area of the Old North End. So just, we have to meet the market. At one point, we had a buyer initiated where people could get a grant after they qualified and go find a home anywhere. People love that. It really varied our, you know, access. We love that, but we can't get grants for those anymore. Why we're developing scale. So very, very important thing about this, you understand this, your what you're facing and your housing costs, but on average, our buyers get $62,000 in public subsidy to make the home affordable. That's an average, and so they're buying well below market. We like to get them past private mortgage insurance, so more of their mortgage dollar goes right to building equity. And so it is a big lift, the initial investment. Your presentation covered the way you're looking at doing that. But this shows you the real value to your communities overall. So we have those, when we did this, we didn't have 700 homeowners yet, but it was high 600s. And with resales, we've served 1,100 households. And if we had invested in homeownership the conventional way, we would only have served 614. So actually double. So over the years, this has both worked to keep that public investment, but we test it, and it's also still serving that income band. 2/3 of our home buyers, when they sell, go on to buy in the market. So they definitely are earning a decent amount of equity by being able to get in. In fact, our average subsidy right now, we looked at it, our average earnings is $25,000. And that's people owning a home for 7 to 10 years. We track pretty much the market in terms of turnover. So it's a people look at that as is this way to get in the market now, not wait as prices go like this and your wages don't. So that's me. Thank you for your attention and a little race through our world.
Thank you so much, Brenda. This was incredible to hear about, and this range of things that you all are working on is just incredible, and I think definitely piques the interest of our region quite a bit. So we do have some time.
Yep.
If anybody has questions, and if Chloe's still here, Chloe, I'll pin you again. We have a question in the chat that might be a little bit hard to answer on the fly, but we'll take a stab at it. After startup phase, what scale is required for an annual budget for a second stage trust? So what size or range of unencumbered assets on hand for purchase, annual operating expenses, annual revenue needed to replenish purchasing power, the number of major donors ready to consider for support for new projects, etc. If somebody wants to take a stab at that, go ahead. If not, I can follow up with our question asker.
Okay. I could speak to it, but Chloe, did you wanna?
I was gonna say you probably have a better grounded experience with that, Brenda, but I'm happy to jump in. I think part of it certainly depends on how big it can get, how much funding it can receive, how it attracts that funding. But you saw those initial numbers really starting up more like in the $50,000-$100,000 range. But as it's able to bring staff on, probably looking more several $100,000 for operating costs. And then given the cost of property in the region, I think, ideally you'd be looking to have closer to a million available for different projects and properties. I think Island Housing Trust is operating with several million, I believe, at this point. But they've also been in existence for a couple decades now. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, Brenda, you probably have some
Yeah.
grounded experience there.
Yeah, so those, you were right, Chloe, that what you need depends on your pace of growth. And another good point you made in your planning proposal is that these relationships and partnerships you will have with local government can create opportunities. So we were started with the help of our government. Your initial capacity grant window of 50 to 100 is excellent. More than enough at 100 to get you started. But if you're working with local governments, they're lining up a pipeline of projects. They're giving, and you can, how much you need to raise versus how much you earn depends on that scale, right? You can pay yourself when you develop, you can get paid in the deal. Every land trust has stewardship fees for the owners. They're small, but they build up with you. So they pay right now around the country, it's about $50 a month, well below a market lease. And, they just build up with you and you have that consistent funding. But looking to communities to provide what they have in public funds and then supplementing that with private. I've made these lists of the sources we use, and essentially if it's money and it's not illegal, we use it. So there's not a dedicated funding source federally, and who knows now, but even till now, for home ownership. But the home program and CDBG are two big federal housing programs that can do this. And then what you can create locally, we create a trust fund at the city and state level. Inclusionary zoning creates a value because you'll get a discounted property, right, to start with from the deal. So you do really have to do that diversity of sources and grow, we could develop far more housing if there was the capital sources for the product. And so we have to limit what, the opportunities that come to us, and our capacity is bigger than the subsidized capital that we need to develop. So you want those opportunities coming to you. And then there was one more thing I wanted to mention. Right today, we have 6 people working in shared equity, and our earned income and shared equity from, covers them. Plus it covers some of our counseling. So it has become sustainable, and it was sustainable about since we had 500 homes. So we had less staff, but we had, and since then the growth has supported that program.
Thank you both. I'll also note I had one other group I was hoping could be here today, and the scheduling didn't work out. They're a smaller land trust out in Western Mass, and they're fairly recent, and they've got an operating budget or a budget right around like 1.6, $1.7 million. And, about $300,000 worth of cash, about $500,000 worth of grants, and then about $800,000 worth of their property. So they talk about the funding gap. And that the properties that are in their portfolio, even if it's only a couple of them, is sort of how they're leveraging some of that gap. But thank you for all of those details. Oh, look, we have more questions. Exciting. Okay. For Chloe, why project size of 2 to 20 units?
Sure. So I will start out with saying I don't think that's a really hard and strict rule that it would have to follow, but that's something we'd be targeting because there isn't generally as many tools or mechanisms to support those smaller developments right now. So the much larger scale developments could often obtain funds such as through low income housing tax credits, they have the scale to do that. Certainly not saying it's always guaranteed. But this in between of you're not developing single family homes, but these smaller multifamily developments is kind of a gap that we've seen so far in the region in terms of what's currently being developed. So this organization focusing on that smaller scale would be one way to address that. And I think also just kind of given its capacity and as it evolves, taking on kind of those smaller scale projects makes more sense. Though over time, not to say that it couldn't evolve to take on larger projects, just that's a kind of niche that isn't being served as much in the region as the other kind of more extreme ends of the development spectrum.
Thank you, Chloe. All right, I think this one is for Brenda. Have you considered for-profit entities to provide funding for shared ownership programs?
That's not shared equity housing. So shared ownership programs do not give enough of good return to your homeowner, nor would they create a permanently affordable home. So no, we don't do that. And in fact, we never use loan capital on the homes. The grant money we put in is an asset on our books. And so that's a value to the organization. And it's also the protection to the homeowner that, you know, that the deal won't change, and we're preserving that affordability.
All right, thank you. And then the follow-up is, are you allowed to issue debt to fund loans, and would it be tax exempt?
We don't do that. To fund loans, I'm not sure what she means, issue debt to fund loans. Actually, I'm not sure. I'm sorry, I don't quite understand.
That's all right. If she wants to follow up, we can provide some more detail. Oh, for you to provide loans.
All the loans we provide come from subsidized capital from programs. CDBG is our low-income loan. The farm worker housing is a source, I think, that originates with RD. The landlord program is a bond. So the state has bonded for affordable housing recently, and that's part of it. So no, we use public sources. We're not really a lending entity like some like NeighborWorks organizations could be, or CDFIs. So that's what we do.
Thank you, Brenda. Okay, what steps can a private developer or contractor make to help build affordable and attainable homes for a CLT?
Yeah, a great practice is if they are doing a development is to offer you, so let's say even if there's an inclusionary zone, which here's an ordinance to discount, sometimes they do this to leverage their deal, they do the development and then they offer you 6 sites in the development. If they're affordable to you and you can get some funds to subsidize those homes, it's a great way to integrate neighborhoods. And when you're starting, you may not have the development capacity to get something through zoning or to get the variances you need or to assemble property. So if they do all that, that may be in the cost to you of your home, but at least you have that opportunity to see if the cost is attainable for you to do your deal. And developers, so we do a lot of work with private entities. They can turnkey development, meaning, they build it and then you buy a few homes from them. Working with other nonprofit developers, you may have a habitat in the Cape, and they build very affordably, obviously, and we put it together. They came to us, and we often provide sites for them and help their home buyers get through home counseling and all that. So, yeah, partnerships are really important, and we've partnered with private developers in dozens of ways.
Great, thank you. All right, the next question is, can housing trusts develop housing on public land? I think meaning town-owned or municipality-owned.
We have done that a couple of times. So in that case, your municipality is going to give you some kind of lease from them, right? And you'll want that to be very favorable long term, so you don't suddenly have a balloon that affects your residents. But of course, and sometimes public lands could be deeded over to you for your deals. In Albuquerque, for example, this is quite a while ago, the city redeveloped a brownfield, a big brownfield, and wanted to redevelop it and gave a chunk of it to land trust for housing home ownership. So that's totally possible.
Awesome. And then I think for Chloe, can you define what, like, when we talk about affordability, there's a legal definition for that. When we talk about attainable, we're sort of trying to capture this like sentiment that people sort of talk about, but it doesn't have the same like concise or agreed upon definition. So can you just talk about, when we talk about attainable, what's the sort of ballpark that we're meaning in terms of AMI?
Sure. And I think it can vary significantly from town to town. I will preface it with that. And yes, as Amanda said, there is a legal definition for affordable. Attainable is squishier, but really it's it's getting at above that 80% AMI in this context, potentially 150, maybe even 200 in some communities. I do think I'm blanking on which one, but I think there is at least one community on the Cape that themselves defines attainable going up to 200% AMI. But really getting at the need, I would say, of their residents and of those households, residents making more than 80% AMI, but where a house on the open market is not affordable. They're spending an exorbitant amount of their income on housing if they were to try to pursue that. So really, I think it's that broader range of incomes, but also getting kind of more just to the core tenet of being able to secure housing in a manner that then you're also still able to provide for your other needs, and with your income, it's not taking up all of your income. So
yes, housing that you can afford to live in.
yeah.
Really great. Can I offer something?
Absolutely,
The
Brenda.
federal programs push you to 80% and below, which today is getting very hard for home ownership. You need such a deep subsidy.
Yeah.
Most groups are serving 80% by large to 120. We used to serve 80 to 100, and we had to go up with the costs. But the way you measure it is a person should be paying 30% of their income to mortgage, taxes, insurance, so they're not overburdened, and a bank won't make them a loan over that now that we don't have maybe subprime. But so you want to get people there, and so when you do your analysis, it's all right. Who can afford a home? Where do you have to be? Do you have to be at 100, 120, 140? Everybody under there, right? How do we get them in? What does it cost? And then what's our sweet spot for, for serving people if they're only mortgaging 30% of income? So how affordable can you get the home to that affordability with a subsidy that isn't, $1 million?
Yeah, and thank you for that, Brenda. I think that is sort of at the crux of a lot of our conversations. And as the Housing Institute has talked about, as we continue to delve into what attainable means and what the strategies are to support that demographic, that we don't want it to be competitive and that attainable housing is sort of pitted against affordable housing.
Yes.
Because yes, the gap between, truly low income households to be able to get to home ownership is that much greater, and we want to make sure that we're serving all of the different needs that our community has. All right, that is the end of the questions that are in the chat. I will do one call for hands in the audience if there's anything burning on anyone's mind. As always, we're recording the session. I'll send out the slides and any related materials that we've talked about. We'll have Chloe and Brenda's contact information if you'd like to reach out directly to them or to me for more detailed or for follow-up questions. Oh, thank God, Elizabeth, you save me every time. Ask us that question, lady. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
There we go.
There you go.
I'm having a little problem with Percy, who wishes to contribute to the conversation. But I'm wondering, this is really for the group. I mean, I'm wondering if we think that if we tried to pull this together, if we think that the Chamber of Commerce's would be a way to start with the private partnership part, and I'm wondering if that's what they did in Vermont.
You want me to?
Yeah, go ahead, Brenda.
Yeah, in the Burlington area, Burlington, Chittenden County, I believe, we had a good partnership with the chamber. You know, they're a nonprofit too, representing businesses, so they can't help you financially, but definitely facilitated those relationships with employers and engaged employers in saying we need affordable housing for, you know, low-income people, but also maybe you could get some employer-assisted housing going with the companies that have resources. So now all of your local, I would say, civic organizations can and ought to be at some point, at some level, part of this.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna have to log off.
Yep, Brenda, I know that you've got a hard stop. Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate your insight, and certainly if anyone else has questions for you, they can reach out directly. But thank you again for being here. And
Okay.
Chloe, thank you to you
you.
as well. Oh, look, we can go ahead and cut you guys loose a couple minutes early today. In wrapping up, I think there's so much for us to chew on this particular topic. And yes, this idea of like regionality, you know, the taking advantage of economies of scale and every town not trying to sort of do it by themselves, I think is important. But, you know, sort of the common threads that come up throughout Housing Institute programming, this idea of values, you know, what's important to us, what are the things we want to preserve and sustain in our communities, and how do community land trusts maybe help support that. How are we using all the different tools in our toolboxes? Both Chloe and Brenda talked about, you know, what are the zoning changes and policy changes that might be needed to make these things possible? How can they support a range of incomes and households? You know, we always talk about, yeah, siting housing in targeted places so that away from environmentally sensitive spots, places that have utilities, places that are walkable or close to transport or close to amenities. So I think what we're talking about is in line with many of the themes that run throughout the Housing Institute. And I think it's a conversation that obviously we're going to continue to have and continue to think through. But I thank you all so much for your interest. Next up in the Housing Institute curriculum, we have Spring Peer Group coming up in March. That registration link is live on our website, and I will send that around. And then in April, our final workshop is on 40R or smart growth. So stay tuned for more details on that. If you have any other future workshop ideas that you'd like us to consider for next year's curriculum or the year after, feel free to stick it in the chat on your way out. And beyond that, you are all free to go to enjoy what is a little bit of a cloudy Wednesday, but the weather promises me it's not going to snow. It's only going to rain later. And you will be hearing from me if that is not the case. But thank you all so much and enjoy your afternoon.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
Amanda.
And please reach
Thanks.
out if you
Thanks, Chloe.